Wow 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 bow dun 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 bow 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 dun 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 dun.
Hello, welcome to the channel. I know this doesn't look probably like a normal video because normally there'd be a webcam and there'd be, the game, etc. But this is kind of a new take on all that. Today in this video, I'm hoping to try and test out a new board game that I'm making, and I'm using, as you can see if you're fairly savvy, some Twilight Imperium pieces in order to help represent things on the board. For example, it'd be a little tough for me to get all the pieces I need to test out my board game without it. What I'm doing essentially, in all honesty, is taking the concept of Twilight Imperium 3rd edition and changing it to try and get it under 2 hours. That's kind of my project. So I want a game that you can still have all the fun of with Twilight Imperium, but is quicker and makes a lot more sense. So the purpose of these videos is kind of my own personal progress, just to hang on to in case I have some notes I need to go over or want to go back to previous versions of rules, or I just forget something I need to change. So this kind of video is going to be teaching the game, the whole game, in a pretty straightforward way, so that way if this version of the game also seems interesting, people can also play it. So what did I do, right? So you got to kind of go over creation, right? So in the old game you had tiles where you had Mechatol Rex, which was the center planet, and then there were also these blank space tiles, there were planet tiles, and then you had your home tiles with your starting troops. The way I've set it up is that you're going to have still a home system, but you'll notice that there's spaces in between each of these, each one. There's spaces. So if you had a, if you had a ground troop over there, and then you had another ground troop over here, these guys wouldn't be fighting because even though they're on the same planet, they're in different spots. So multiple players can they could have a presence on the planet with no issue. It's only when two forces interact that there'd be an actual battle that would need to be resolved. But that'll get explained later, obviously. So, in my game, there's 3 kinds of resources. There is Cylin, which is what I like to call just kind of metal. It's my version of metal. There's food, and then there's also, let me see if I can find a resource, tech. There's tech also. So there's 3 kinds of resources. I've made new faction sheets, which lay out pretty much everything that you would want to see. Obviously, there's different, lore and stuff. Each faction has its own power. We got a planet. We have a resource track for all 3. So if you scoot these over a bit, you have Cylin, food, and tech, and then it goes up to about 20. So pretty good amount you can hold of each kind. We also have the costs for the current units. We also have stats, so that way you know how they work. And then we also have the most important part of the game, the order of play. Now, the important part about the order of play is that it shows off how to play the game. So let's go ahead and start, right? Let's go ahead and begin the game. So if you look at the order of play, the first step is to purchase units. And this game, I'm going to be rebranding it. It's no longer Twilight Imperium Revised or anything like that, because that'd be copyrighted. Instead, it's going to be known as Starlight Empire. That's what I'm calling it. It's just my name. It might be a work in progress name, but I kind of like the sound of it. I think I might keep it. So the first thing you do when you start a game is you build the world. So I already have it laid out here, but I'm going to show you how you would normally do it. You'd start by placing your planet. Now I hand cut out all these pieces, so they don't all fit together perfectly. Orientation does matter. You'll notice there's ID numbers on every single one of these, and that helps you with orientation. So they should always be oriented the same way. So when you build the board, you'd start out with these, with the center planet, and then you'd collect all the space tiles, and you would have them secretly. You'd shuffle them up, and you'd flip them over, face down, and then, oh, look at this, you flip it over, and then you put it in. Same thing with the planets, and then there's enough tiles that every person would get their starting world, their second home world, and then an empty space tile. So what this does is it creates an interesting dynamic on the board where not everyone is going to be near the same stuff. For example, there are 2 home planets next to each other over here, and come over here. Over here, there's 2 space tiles next to each other near other players. So that will incentivize or disincentivize certain kinds of gameplay as we move on. So once you have your board set up, and this is just a random example, you know, I'm not taking control of anyone in particular. Once the board is set up, you're then gonna go ahead and begin with the starting action, I guess you could say. You'd begin the order of play, essentially, is what you would do. So step 1 would be to purchase units. So you'd set it up, and you'd be like, all right, everyone, you're going to go purchase your units. How do you know what you purchase on the first turn? Well, on the very first turn, you're going to collect the resources on only your home planet. For example, this is the BGX, the Byron House of Zax is what we're calling it. The humans are over here, the United Earth Confederation. And everyone has different powers, everyone has different amounts of these resources on their starting worlds. So I've already gone through the slow process of purchasing starting units based on what I think would be optimal for them, but you know, what are you going to do? And then after the initial purchasing of starting units, just as a baseline, and this might change, I'm thinking about giving everyone a set starting units, and then from there perhaps adding customization. But as the rules are written right now in this version, everyone starts out with these units, and then we would move on to the move phase. So it's interesting. Yeah. Okay, let me look around. Sorry guys, this is not scripted. This is not planned. No, actually, you know what? That's a bit dumb. I think I'm gonna change that. This is the nice thing about recording these things, is that I can know what I need to change when I go back and play the video. So I'm gonna note at about 7:30, timestamp, I'm gonna need to change the rule that I want to give everyone the same starting units, I think, because I think that having everyone purchase their individual units will take too long and it might not be balanced. But for now, we'll just use the starting setup. So we move on to the move phase, right? So purchasing units is pretty simple, right? You have your resources that would be on your board, and you know maybe they'll be at 7 or 5, 6, however many, and then you'd look at the cost. You'd look at the cost here, and then say you want a ground force. Well, that's 1 food. So then you come to your food track, and you're like, oh look, let's take down a food. And then you move a food. Very easy to understand. Purchasing units. That's all you do. The way it works is you elect someone to be start player. We'll just say, for the purposes of this example, we'll say blue is start player, the Earth, humans, okay? So, hooray, I guess, for them. Wait a minute. There's 7 here. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's too many flags. Sorry. Looking at the score track, all of a sudden I notice there's too many flags. How did... Oh. We're not using those. And, alright, now we're going to go ahead and move on to the movement phase. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and move on to the movement phase. So the movement phase in this game is actually really straightforward. All of the players here are going to have access to these chips. They could be any shape that you wanted to make them. But I'm using triangles because that's just what I have on hand in terms of good quality wooden pieces that I ordered from a website, which I've now forgotten the publisher, but oh well. So what you do is, if you want to move your ships, for example, like let's say black here, really wants to take his transport and his destroyer, you know, out to go to another system. Well, as per the rules of my game, what you do is you would take one of these chips and say maybe, oh, I don't know, they want to go over to this planet. So you put a chip down onto a system, fair enough. So then what you can do is any number of thing, pretty much if you, all the interaction you want to do on this planet happens at once. So you could take a ship, fly your transport over, and you could even take your trooper and you might go ahead and land on, say, I don't know, the food planet, so 4-food planet, and you just deploy right away because there's no fighting, there's no enemy units in there, so you just skip that step and go ahead and deploy. No reason to slow it down. Then this destroyer, now this destroyer is able to actually move 2 in my game, but however you're only 1 away, so you only go 1. You can't go like activate here, move through. You can only interact, technically what it is interacting with that specific system. So you could just fly over there, and then that's generally how you would move. Now I bet you're wondering, well, what happens if, say, you know, someone else, you know, how do you ever fight that? So obviously the obvious option is you can take your chip, like let's say this was pulled off, and I don't know, maybe a cruiser's out here floating in space, right? Maybe it came all the way from Red and they brought it down. So you have a cruiser, and the cruiser's like, oh, well, you know what? I'd like to go ahead and make an attack. So it's the Red player's turn. It's their move on movement, so they get to play a chip. Now the way movement works specifically is on your turn, starting with whoever is going first. Each player goes around the table, each placing a single chip, interacting with that system, then it passes to the next person over and over until there's no more movement left to be done. So there's no limit to this, to what you can move. But units inside of a system that are activated cannot leave the system. They can only interact with the system. So say this transport, if it wanted to, could it actually pick up this unit, or could perhaps transfer it to another planet if there's a resource that's more valuable to them. That's completely fine, but they can't, you know, this ship can't leave the destroyer. The destroyer has no way to get out. So anyway, so the system's been activated, and now we would bring in, because the red players who activated it, the person who activates the system always goes first, so then they would bring in their ship. And look, now we have 2 opposite colors, so this would initiate a round of attacking. But as per the rules of movement, after the first start player makes their interaction with the system first, then it passes to everyone else. So then yellow would go, purple would go, and now black would go. So black could actually go ahead and take their ship and also bring it into the fight if they wanted to. So you gotta be really careful when you think about attacking. You need to plan out, okay, how are you gonna do this? And then, you know, it passed to green, passed to blue. This system is now done because everyone has moved, and we would just wait until the attack phase, the battle phase, to actually do that. Now obviously you can go ahead and you know, activate a system over here. You can pick up your ships, like that can move 2 and they can move further. You can't have a ship that moves 1 go halfway. They have to actually reach the system that you're traveling to, because like I said, they're not interacting with the system. They're just not. They're not there. So you would need to make sure that you have something that can actually deal with it. Otherwise, it's not like a legal, like, sure, you could put a chip down, nothing can happen, so the chip would go away. The game fixes itself. Totally unnecessary. What's more interesting, though, is that you can actually have situations where you might, say, have 3 people engaged. So let's say black moves in, maybe blue, you know, built like a cruiser. No, well, built like maybe another ship. I'm a little unsure what model-wise what to call everything, because this is still a work in progress. But say they bring in another ship here, and then there's a 3-way battle, or 2-way, or any which way you want. So you'll learn more about how the battle works when we actually cover the attack phase in a second here. But just wanting to point out that just because there's 2 opposite colors in the system, you can have as many different teams in a single system as you want to. There's no restriction on that. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the attack phase. Alright, so now we would move on to the attack phase, or step 3, under the order of play, you can see we're up to attack. So how does it actually work? So after everyone is done moving all of their stuff, they would go ahead and get to declare some attacks, right? So the way it works is starting with, well, it's simultaneous, but depending on your dice limitations, which I'm not sure how much dice to include if I were to send this game out, based on your whatever kind of initiative you want, everyone's going to roll dice at the same time. That's the gist of it. So, but for simplicity's sake, we'll start with the red player. And the way it works is the red player says, oh, I'm going to roll a hit, and then I'm going to roll to attack something, and then the black player would choose what to lose. So you would roll the die. Here, I'll just explain it. This is first version, obviously. So this cruiser, the red cruiser, would be using a D10 to make its attack. So it would say, okay, I'm going to make an attack with this 7. So if we come here and look at the unit stats, everything will be hurt on a 7. That's what it would be hurt on. So then the black player would take 1 damage at some point. Could be, for example, on its own cruiser, which does have a 2nd health point. So you could just turn it on its side there, and it would be completely fine. That's a hit. Now maybe it would be the black player's turn. So they also have a cruiser. Now there's 2 opponents, right? So you could say, oh, I'd like to attack that ship. You know, you have to target a team. Red would have been targeting the black team. But for example, maybe black says, oh, well, I don't know what blue's doing there, but we're definitely fighting reds. Let's target the reds. So the cruiser that's been tipped over would open fire. And that is a miss. We also have a transport in the battle. That would be rolling its D4. Transports have a D4. They're very bad. 1. Yep. In fact, it cannot even attack a destroyer, for example. You just wouldn't be able to. And then the actual destroyer is rolling a D8, which could possibly get a hit on that, but it's going to be tough. Oh, but they did. So then that would also be a hit. And that's normal simultaneous combat. That's how it normally works. However, in order to keep the game, to give a little bit of an advantage to ships and just the weaker ships, the way I'm thinking about implementing it, and this is why I didn't cover it originally, another way you could do the battle, or you could have a battle, I should say, is if there's fighters in the mix. Okay, if there's some fighters, and then the transport, those guys would actually get to fight beforehand. So how would that work? So if you had fighters, for example, they're rolling D6s, and there's 2 of them. So I'd have rolled this twice. So I'd be like, ooh, they got a 6, good call, and a 4. So they got a 6 and a 4. So let's see what they can use. They could use, and both hits have to go through. There's no like stopping it. But they got a 6 and a 4. So that means the 6 that could be hit only work against the oppressor. Or actually, I should say the 6 can work against anything, but the 4 only works against the the transport, the carrier, and the destroyer. So they could take the hit on this guy who would get taken out, which is fine. And there's another hit that would need to be allocated, so we could put that 6 on the cruiser in order to make sure that we're sustaining. That everything's fine. In fact, they might even remove the transport, keep that destroyer in the battle, because it rolls a little bit better. And then, of course, their transport would fire, so you'd be like, ooh, I'm going to roll this D4. We got a 1. Garbage, no hits over there. Then, before the other ships can fight, because only fighters and transports and carriers, so I guess since this is a carrier, this guy would technically fight, and he's fighting the black, so... You know, or maybe you might even get a change of heart, and maybe he'll be like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and make an attack against these, the red player. Rolled a 2. Not good enough. Not going to hurt anything. And then losses are taken. So then this transport is gone. Then the cruisers would get to fire. So the cruisers would do their normal thing. Red would roll the D10. They get a 9. That would probably be taken on that destroyer. That's definitely gone. But the destroyer will still get a roll. Importantly to remember. So... the destroyer rolls a D8, got a 1, garbage. The cruiser would roll a 5. That hit would have to be taken, on a fighter. And then the battlefield would look like this. So, that's kind of how combat would work overall. Then, if there were any ground forces, however there aren't, but let's just pretend that there were ground forces, then ground forces would fight. So then they would each be rolling again simultaneously, it doesn't matter what order you do it in. They'd be rolling 6-sided dice, and if you get a 5 or higher, then a unit is killed. That's that. But you only have a ground force fight if there are transports to deploy ground forces in there. Like if there's and that's why it's a little nuanced. So if you have 2 ground forces already on the planet before battle starts, in the move phase, when this is activated, they can move in to be able to do attacks, and then the other player can choose, oh, do I want to stay there or do I want to move the other way? You could do that. It's completely fine. You could have a peaceful thing. You don't have to interact, but it's always whoever activates first would make the move. But interestingly, if you had, say, let me grab a transport. So if you had a transport in the system and it was carrying this ground force here, and it was in the battle, you do the ship combat first, then any transports that still have troops, after the first round of combat only, they can deploy their troops onto the planet. That's when you would actually do a deployment if you're planning on like doing it in a battle. Like if you're bringing troops over and there's enemy ships in the area. If there's no enemy ships in the area, you can just deploy right away. You can just skip that whole step because there's no fight to be had. But you do have to wait because you need to kind of clear out the airspace to make the landing of the troops viable, if that makes sense. And it'll make a little more sense when we play the game or when I play a mock game on my own here after I get through the rules. So anyway, so you'd have a round of combat, then the players, it's a negotiation game, the players could say, you know what, I'm willing to stop the battle and let you retreat, or, and this is something I'm thinking about doing, the player can roll any sided dice and divide it in half. So if you take a 6-sided dice divided by 3, the odds are completely the same no matter what you do. And you do this for each ship, and if you roll on the upper half of the die, like let's say 4, 5, or 6, did not, the ship would be allowed to retreat. But didn't, so that guy is stuck there. They cannot retreat again until the next round of combat ends. Then the blue player could opt to retreat. They could say, ooh, I think red might kill me, so let's try and run away. Oh, they rolled a 4. And then they would just move their normal movement away. So they could just escape or move into here. And you'll notice there are these lines. They just treat them each as spaces. Very simple to understand. They're just different spaces. So then another round of combat would happen or not happen. In fact, red could even say, you know what? I'm willing to stop the fighting. You just stop. You do have to complete 1 full round of combat if you say you're attacking. You can't, like, start a round of combat, then stop it. You have to, like, get through at least 1 round of combat if you move into a system with the intention of starting a battle. Because remember, the attack phase happens separately than move phase. And anything can be negotiated in this game, anything at all that you want to have done. I want to keep this game fairly open. So then after battle, chip will stay there, go through all the attacks, then at this point you can move on to the 4th step, and at this point you can go ahead and remove all the chips once the attack phase is over, and you're moving into step 4, which is the purchase tech phase. We're going to go ahead and jump over to that. Alright, so purchasing tech. How does that actually work? Starting with the start player, again, remember we were pretending to be blue, so we'll come over here. So you see that blue, maybe it's later in the game, and blue has moved their ship out, and they've taken some stuff here. They're leaving fighters behind to defend. Now, the way you need to look at things is that resources are collected at the end of most of the phase, right before scoring. So you move out, and in the purchase tech phase, if you don't have resources saved from the previous round, you're not going to be able to purchase any tech cards or deceit cards. That's 2 things that you're going to be purchasing. But let's just pretend, for the sake of an example here, that for example, blue had saved up enough. The humans had gone all the way up to 15. They'd waited long enough. They're up to 15 tech points. Then they might be allowed to they will be allowed to first purchase technology. So if we go ahead and grab our nice little technology sheet here, and again, I need a bigger table to really kind of flesh this out. But for now, we'll just lay this here. You can see we have a nice technology tree. So there's a name of what the tech is, a description of what the tech does, an arrow saying what the next available tech will be, and a cost, which is for this one 15 tech. So because blue has 15 tech, they would come over on their turn and they'd say, I'd like to purchase this, and they take their cube and they bring it back down to the bottom. And then what they would do, two options I'm thinking about doing, is one, they would just place their flag on the technology to declare, we have that technology. Or everyone would actually have their own, and I think everyone having their own would be a little bit nicer, so then you could just, boop, put in your cube and say, aha, I've got it. Excellent. Just because it'd be a little tough to cram all of the flags on top of one tech one, because you still want to be able to read the tech to make sure. And this would be your own personal tech sheet, and on the tech tree they all have different costs. As it gets further down the tech tree, things get more and more expensive. The red arrows mean that you need to have, it's just helpful to let you know that you're going to need carrier capacity and transport capacity in order to get hull armor. Alright, so this just upgrades, and then that one leads into, for example, punch it, and you can see there's a nice, much smaller than the original game of Twilight Imperium. That's why I'm making this game like this. A much smaller tech tree, but it still has a, expensive ending, and there's a lot of building up, so it'll be slow to work through. This isn't meant to be all able to be done at a time. Now, another option you can have, say you don't want to purchase tech. You always have to purchase tech first, but then anyone who's saved up tech points, maybe someone else had 15, they were like, oh, you know what, I don't really need tech. I'd rather purchase some deceit cards. Ooh. So how do you purchase a deceit card? Well, on your turn, you can spend 10 tech to get your first deceit card, and you can spend an extra 5 for an additional deceit card. So if you have 15 tech and maybe you don't have deceit cards yet, because it's the start of the game, which would make sense, you go ahead and spend your 15, and you would go over here and draw 2 deceit cards. So and we'll talk about how deceit cards specifically work when we get to that phase, but for now, you just would take a look and see what you get, and you'd be like, oh, look at these nice deceit cards. It'll make a lot more sense later on. And then that's what you do. You can have up to 3 deceit cards in your hand, not including deceit cards that are played face down. So with that being said, conveniently enough, let's go ahead and move on to the deceit card phase of the game. Alright, deceit cards. Let's go ahead and see what these are all about. So if I'm the player and it's later in my turn and I'm saying, well, I got some deceit cards here and I'd like to play them. I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to play them though. Well, in this phase, when you come to phase 5, this is when you can play your deceit cards. There's 2 ways you can play a deceit card. One way is to say, you know what, I'm just going to lay it face down. Alright? Kind of like a trap card from Yu-Gi-Oh! You lay it face down and you're like, that's me kind of setting it. You set the card down. Because at the bottom of each card, there's going to be, it's going to tell you when you can use it, which is step 6 for this particular card, and whether or not it needs to be face down or it can be played from hand. So if it's face down, that means you put it face down. It no longer contributes to your hand limit, but, and this is another face down, for example, however, you can't, it's not like, it's kind of like telling the enemy what you might have. It's just kind of another telegraphing way of doing it, and then you need to remember, oh, when I get to step 6, which is what we'll cover next, I'll get to use this deceit card. And there's other cards you would, if we pretended this was play from hand, you'd hold it and it would tell you specifically what phase you would use it in. So you just check and see what phase. And then all you do is you read what the card says. There's lots of different cards. This one, for example, military blockade, placed on a system. This pretty much blocks people from moving, so I could be like, ooh, I have a military blockade, and I'm using it in the movement phase. And you have to remember doing this anytime you want to. You just go boop, deceit, military blockade, and you play it, and you're like, oh, it's so cool. And now nothing can move in. No interaction can be done with that system. It's just non-activatable. And there's a limited amount. Obviously, you discard when you're done, but, after its effect is gone. Or you play something like a trade blockade. And in order to explain how this card works, we're actually going to go ahead and jump on over to the 6th step, which is, of course, collecting resources. Alright, now we're on to step 6, which is going to be the collecting of resources. So, collecting of resources is super duper simple, for the most part. So at any point in time during the collect resources turn, someone could play a deceit card, and they might say, oh, I'm going to put down a trade blockade, and they could put a trade blockade, say, right there, if they wanted to. And we'll get back to how that works in a second. But it's important to note someone might play a trade blockade right at the beginning, which would be the best time to use it. And we'll go over how that card would work. Kind of extending also a demonstration of how deceit cards work from the last step. So normally, if you're the blue player and you're like, okay, I'm going to go ahead, and you do this in turn order just to keep things simple, you'd say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and play. So I'm going to collect my resources here. Let's say they were down to nothing, and they were like, okay, so I get 5 food because they own it. So they go up 5 food, they go up 3 Cylin, and then they get a tech. Look at that, already making great progress. This flag here, right near the home system, would indicate that all of these planets are currently in control by the blue player, the humans, the United Earth Confederation. So they will get all those resources, because what it's implying there by putting this flag there is in order to prevent us from having to, when you pick up troops, put a flag on every single space. If you control everything in the whole system, just go ahead and put a flag right there. So then they would also gain 1 technology, or no, 2 technology, I should say, of food and Cylin. So let's see how that goes. You get 2 technology, 1 more Cylin, and 1 more food. Up to 6 food, looking good. And then you'd come over here. Uh-oh, there's the people sharing planets. How does this work? Well, funny enough, they actually would both count as getting their resources. So blue would get a tech, and green would perhaps be collecting 2 tech and 1 Cylin in this resource, as well as, because they have their flag there, green's flag, they also would get 2 Cylin from there. So blue would go ahead and get their 1 tech point. Boop. And then green on theirs would go ahead and get 2 tech points. If we, here I'm gonna, hold on guys, gotta steal a cube. Where'd I put a cube? Ah, great, found a cube. So, green would go ahead and take 2 tech for that. They would go ahead and get 1 C for that, and they would all, I'm sorry, 2 C, 3 C. They have 3 C on this planet. It's a very, you know, this is a tech and Cylin planet. And why is this able to be shared? Because there's no airspace, there's no fleets blocking the path. If, for example, we have this scenario where, oh, look at that, you'd think that, okay, the green's going to get some supplies. They have a flag marker on their 1C here. They haven't quite made it to that planet yet because they're in a bit of a rush. But look, 4 food. Ah, that's great. But unfortunately, blue has some fighters blocking the airspace. So that means supply is cut. This system can only for the blue player would resources be able to get back. Because the way resource collection works is you need to draw a path from your system all the way to your home system. So for green, the reason why they're getting these resources is because there's an opening right there, and it goes around and around to there. That's a route of 4. That's a route of 4 empty spaces that is allowing them to collect these resources. Blue isn't collecting resources here, but they're preventing this system from being used. Now, the reason why blue gets these resources is because they can travel a path like this. If someone puts a trade blockade, what's happening is you're covering the system. So normally, blue would also be getting, because this is UEC, they would also be getting an additional 2 food and 1 Cylin. But someone played a trade blockade. Ooh, horrible. So what it means is that this is like a wall for trade resources. So resources can't use this space as a path, and you can play these anywhere you want to, even on an empty space. It means that what it's doing, if you read it, you pick a system. The system may not send resources, which means that this planet can't send resources back to home, and it also blocks other resource trade routes. It's just, oh, whatever, maybe there's a cloud or something. The trade routes just don't work. So that's kind of and how you would use these deceit cards. You just play them at any point in time when they are allowed. So step 6, you could wait for your turn. You could play it on other people's turns. You can literally play it whenever. That's part of it. That's why it's a deceit, because nobody knew what you were expecting. So that's pretty much deceit cards covered. And yeah, so if you have, say, ships carrying stuff out in the middle of space, obviously you don't collect resources. There are times when you might have troops inside of a transport, and maybe you don't have that planet, for example, then you wouldn't collect the resources for it. Having fleets inside of a system doesn't mean you get resources for it. You actually need to land your ground troops to actually claim it as your own. Then obviously, with your ground forces, you're presumably sending in civilians, who would therefore be mining in, so you can pick your ground troops back up after you've claimed it to go ahead and move on. And then that's about it. So then as long as there's good trade paths, every planet space that you control feeds your empire and helps you race up those tracks that you can then spend in the next turn for purchasing units. So see if the humans, oh, you have 6 food. That's really good because you can go ahead and buy an oppressor. Ooh, very scary. But there's obviously limited supply. And depending on how things go, these prices actually might be raised. I'm not sure how fair and balanced all these tiles are, but it'd be much easier for me to change, obviously, the printing on this paper rather than changing every single tile to have less resources on it. So then, after resources are collected, then we can move on to scoring victory points. Okay, so then we move on to the final step of a whole round of order of play, which is going to be actually scoring your victory points. So let's go ahead and come over here and see if let's see what we can do. So if we were the red player, for example, we would have these what are called secret objective cards. This is how you actually win the game. You got to do these. So, for example, this one says you need to control systems. You need to control the ship space of the systems, and you need to. This one we could actually do. Let's pretend we could actually do this. So, let's say, for example, red was being real great, and they had a trade route, because this is what it says: have a successful trade route of at least 4 systems. Boom. So if red is all the way over here, they own the whole planet. They could trace a path going 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. And sometimes you might need to artificially change this. So resources will always take the shortest route possible. So even though this is 4 away for some, or actually I guess it would be actually. I'm bad at counting. I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4 to get back. I apologize. That is 4 either way. But there could be scenarios like this where it would be 1, 2, 3. I don't know. I guess it's pretty straightforward. No, never mind. So this card does make sense. I'm just checking myself. So yeah, if you have a successful trade route of at least 4 systems away, you get a point. You don't need to have all these. You don't need to own all these in between. You just need to have a control of something 4 systems away, and then trace a path back to your home, and that'd be a point. So then you would get a point, and you would on this track you'd be like, oh hey, I'm this guy. I'm the red, and I'm gonna gain a point. Great. So what happens is you go ahead and discard that as soon as you complete it. That will go into the trash. We would never see that ever again. And then you automatically are allowed to draw another secret objective off the top. And you're like, ooh, what is this one? Okay, we're going to control planets. Gotcha. A lot of cards have a secret objective worth 3 victory points often of controlling the planets of different sectors. So you'll notice there is 12 planet sectors going around the whole map that are randomly put around. And if you can get an objective card that says, take over these 3, you get 3 points. You only need 10 points to win right now, so shouldn't be too long of a game, but I could see this getting fairly long. Might you could easily make the game shorter by just reducing how many points you need. Maybe you guys even say, hey, you just need to score 3 points. So doing one of these wins you the game, but however, doing one of these will not win you the game. However, it's just easier to complete. I tried to make the objectives as fair and balanced as possible. And then with that does pretty much cover everything that happens. Obviously, start player would move, so if blue started, then it would move to red, and then red would go ahead. I'm sorry, I should say their actual name. They're the Termian Union of Planets, I should say. TUP. And then the games will continue going back to the top with purchase units. Hey, so look, hey, we got all those resources. Now we can, now that we've gone ahead and collected them, we should decide what we want to do. So are we going to save our technology points for buying new tech, or are we going to go ahead and try and purchase an oppressor instead? Are we going to use our food or our metal to be making these advanced warships, or do we need some fighters in order to make sure that we have some good troops to lose? Because it would suck to dump all our resources into one ship. So there are a lot of options that I would think you could do with having 3 different types of resources, and obviously getting more tech is really useful, because if you look at some of this tech, for example, like 19 tech, let me lay it down so it's easier to read. 19 tech, all of your transports and carriers may move to your home system. If someone else activates the system, your transport activates the system I forgot there's a typo. I got to change that. But essentially saying what this tech does is that it lets you, like if you were in here in this system and someone else activates with a triangle, someone else goes, haha, triangle, and activates it, you could say, oh, well, I'm going to use my technology and I'm just going to jump away to your home system. You can only go to your home system. Only a transport and carrier can do this. Obviously, it's a really powerful thing to do, but it's nice. I think it's pretty good. Obviously, you're losing movement because it takes a lot of work to go out. I mean, it's a big cost because I mean, if you're out here, maybe you haven't quite landed yet, and someone activates the system, and they're gonna, about to bring in, a big, a big force of like warships that this thing won't survive. You might be like, okay, we're gonna emergency warp back because there's always a route home, right? Jump back, for example. So there's some pretty good stuff here in terms of technical opportunities. So that pretty much covers how the game works right now. Obviously, this is all subject to change. This is gonna be version 1 of Starlight Empires, and hopefully, you guys really like it. And I'm gonna work now and trying to come up with a good way to fairly do a demo game so you guys can kind of see the full game played over multiple rounds, and hopefully we can get the whole game to be played in under 2 hours. That's the goal of this little experiment here, because normally, because this is based off of TI3, normally it would take like 12 hours, which is absurd for a board game, because in my opinion you should be able to have a big epic board game without having to spend an entire day playing it. As always, guys, I'm Elwirfy, and thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.